In the glittering world of Charleston's elite, Delilah Remington has everything money can buy, except the freedom to choose her own path. Engaged to the perfect man in a perfect arrangement that benefits both wealthy families, she's living a life scripted by others until a musician's soulful song at her birthday party shatters her gilded cage. When Ezra Cole's music awakens something real within her, Delilah must choose between the security of her privileged world and the authentic love that could cost her everything. This is a story about breaking free from expectations, finding your true voice, and discovering that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the courage to be yourself. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The moonlight sparkled on the water as guests in designer clothes flooded into the Remington estate for Delilah's 24th birthday party. The waterfront mansion, with its white columns and sprawling gardens, had been in the Remington family for generations, built on tobacco money that everyone in Charleston respected, or at least pretended to. Delilah Remington stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing the front of her backless silver gown. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant twist, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. All gifts from her father, who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of the Remington wealth. "You look perfect," said her mother, Margaret, appearing in the doorway with a glass of champagne already in hand. "Charles is downstairs waiting. You know he's expecting you to make the announcement tonight." Charles Preston was the son of the most prominent banker in Charleston and had been courting Delilah for the past year. Everyone expected an engagement announcement at tonight's party. Delilah sighed. "Mother, I'm not sure if—" "Nonsense." Margaret cut her off with a sharp smile. "What's not to be sure about? He's handsome, from a good family, and his connections will secure the Remington legacy for another generation. Your father approves. That's all that matters." Delilah took the champagne glass from her mother's hand and downed it in one gulp. "I'll be down in a minute." As her mother left, Delilah stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was beautiful, polished, and completely empty inside. She'd been raised to be the perfect Charleston debutante, always saying the right things, always laughing at the right jokes, always being seen with the right people. But lately, she'd started to wonder if there was more to life than country club memberships and charity galas. Downstairs, the party was in full swing. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and fresh flowers flown in from Holland. A table piled high with expensive gifts stood in one corner, and waiters in white jackets circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "There she is," Charles exclaimed as Delilah descended the staircase. He was tall and handsome in his tailored tuxedo, with slicked-back brown hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The birthday girl herself. He took her hand and kissed it, then slipped his arm around her waist possessively. "I have something special for you later," he whispered, patting his jacket pocket. Delilah forced a smile. She knew exactly what was in that pocket. A diamond ring worth more than most people's houses. A ring that would lock her into this life forever. "Delilah, darling." Her father, William Remington, approached with a group of older men, all business associates who helped keep the Remington tobacco empire running. "Come say hello to everyone. They're all here to celebrate you." For the next hour, Delilah circulated through the crowd, accepting birthday wishes and compliments on her dress, her hair, her party. She drank 3 more glasses of champagne, hoping the alcohol would numb the growing panic she felt every time she caught Charles looking at her expectantly. "Bad news, I'm afraid," her father announced, pulling her aside. "The string quartet has canceled. Car trouble on the highway." "Oh no," Delilah said, not really caring. "I guess we'll just have to use the sound system." "No need. I've found a last-minute replacement. Some local musician who was available. He comes highly recommended by the manager at the Charleston Club." Delilah raised an eyebrow. "A solo performer?" For this crowd, her father shrugged. "Beggars can't be choosers. He'll be here in 20 minutes. When Ezra Cole arrived, he caused quite a stir among the guests. Dressed in a simple black suit with a guitar case in hand, he stood out among the tuxedos and evening gowns like a crow among peacocks. He was tall, with deep brown skin and serious eyes that took in the opulence around him without revealing any emotion. "That's our entertainment?" Charles whispered, loudly enough for those nearby to hear. Couldn't your father find someone more appropriate? Delilah felt a flash of embarrassment, not at Charles's rudeness, but the fact that her own first thought had been similar. The champagne had loosened her tongue, and before she could stop herself, she said, shouldn't he be playing on the sidewalk, not the veranda? The group around her erupted in laughter. Even her father chuckled, though he had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. Ezra Cole heard the comment. His eyes met Delilah's across the room, and for a moment, she felt exposed, as if he could see right through her designer dress to the hollow person underneath. He didn't react. He simply nodded to her father, who directed him to the small stage that had been set up on the veranda, overlooking the water. This should be interesting, Charles snickered, pulling Delilah closer. Maybe he'll play us some blues. More laughter, more champagne. Delilah felt sick. Ezra took his place on the stage, adjusted the microphone, and began to tune his guitar. The party guests gradually turned their attention toward him, some with curious expressions, others with barely concealed disdain. Good evening, Ezra said, his voice deep and smooth. I'd like to wish Ms. Remington a happy birthday, and thank you all for having me here tonight. His politeness only made Delilah feel worse about her comment. She took another sip of champagne to drown the feeling. I'll start with a song I wrote recently, Ezra continued. It's called Masks We Wear. And then he began to play. The first notes silenced the murmurs and whispers. His fingers moved over the strings with effortless grace, creating a melody that seemed to float over the party like a spell. And when he began to sing, even Charles stopped talking. Ezra's voice was unlike anything Delilah had ever heard, rich and soulful, with a depth that made her chest tighten. The lyrics told the story of a person trapped in a life that wasn't their own, wearing a mask for so long they'd forgotten their true face, loving people they didn't love because it was expected. As he sang about walking away from a love that was nothing but a beautiful lie, his eyes found Delilah's in the crowd. There was no accusation there, no anger for earlier comment, just a sad understanding that cut her to the core. Delilah felt her cheeks burn. The song wasn't about her. It couldn't be, but every word felt like it had been written for her. Every line described the emptiness she'd been feeling, the suffocation of expectations, the fear of disappointing everyone who had her life planned out. She couldn't breathe. The veranda, with its fresh sea breeze, suddenly felt stifling. The faces around her, faces she'd known all her life, seemed like strangers. Excuse me, she whispered to Charles, pulling away from his grip. I need some air. We're already outside, he replied, frowning. And he's almost done. Your father wants to make the announcement soon. But Delilah was already moving, slipping through the crowd, ignoring the confused looks. She hurried down the steps of the veranda and into the garden, where the sound of Ezra's voice followed her like a ghost. She found a stone bench hidden behind a magnolia tree and sank onto it, hands shaking. Tears, real tears, not the delicate ones she'd been taught to produce at appropriate moments, burned her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. What was happening to her? It was just a song, just a stranger with a guitar. But something had cracked open inside her, something she'd been trying to ignore for years. She didn't love Charles. She didn't want this life. She didn't even know who she was without all of this, the money, the name, the expectations. From her hiding spot, she could still hear Ezra's voice as he finished the song. The final notes seemed to hang in the air even after he stopped playing. There was a moment of silence, then polite applause, the kind rich people give when they're not sure if they like something but know they should appear cultured. Delilah wiped her tears, smearing her perfect makeup. She couldn't go back to the party like this. She couldn't face Charles or her father or, worst of all, Ezra Cole, whose song had just shattered her carefully constructed world. She sent a text to her best friend, Madison, asking her to tell everyone she had a sudden migraine and had gone to lie down. Then she slipped through the garden to the small side entrance, climbed the back stairs to her bedroom, and locked the door behind her. The sounds of the party continued below. Laughter, music, not Ezra's now, but some recorded jazz her father probably put on, the clink of glasses. Life going on as normal, while Delilah's had just been turned upside down by a song. She kicked off her heels, wiped off her makeup, and sat on her bed, still in her designer gown, feeling like a child playing dress-up. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to really think about what she wanted, not what was expected of her, not what would please her parents or impress Charleston society. And the terrifying truth was, she had no idea. The next morning, Delilah woke to knocking on her bedroom door. "Delilah, are you feeling better?" It was her mother, voice sharp with annoyance. "Charles is very upset. Everyone was expecting an announcement last night." Delilah sat up, her head pounding from too much champagne and too little sleep. "I'm sorry, Mother. I wasn't feeling well." "Well, you've created quite a mess. Your father had to make excuses to everyone. Charles waited around for 2 hours hoping you'd come back down." Guilt washed over Delilah. The familiar, comfortable guilt that had always kept her in line. "I'll call him and apologize. See that you do. And don't forget we have lunch with his parents on Sunday. We can salvage this situation if we move quickly." After her mother left, Delilah showered and dressed in a simple sundress, not her usual designer outfit. She went downstairs to find the staff cleaning up the last remains of the party. "Rosa," she called to the housekeeper who had worked for the Remingtons since before Delilah was born. "Do you know what happened to the musician from last night? The guitar player?" Rosa looked up from a vase of flowers she was arranging. "He left right after his set, miss. Your father tried to pay him, but he wouldn't take the money." "He wouldn't take it? Why not?" Rosa shrugged. "Don't know, miss. He just thanked Mr. Remington for the opportunity and left. Seemed in a hurry." Delilah frowned. "Did he leave a card? Or say where he plays regularly?" "No, miss. But one of the waiters mentioned he sometimes performs at a place called the Blue Door. It's a cafe somewhere on the east side." The east side? Not an area where someone like Delilah Remington would normally go. It was the working class part of town, far from the mansions and country clubs she was familiar with. "Thank you, Rosa." Delilah spent the rest of the day going through the motions. She called Charles and apologized for her migraine, promising to make it up to him. She opened her birthday gifts and wrote thank you notes. She had lunch with her mother and listened to plans for the upcoming charity gala. But all the while, Ezra's song played in her head. All the while, she thought about the Blue Door and wondered if she would find him there. That night, after telling her parents she was meeting Madison for dinner, Delilah got into her white Mercedes convertible, a gift from her father on her 21st birthday, and drove to the east side of Charleston. The Blue Door turned out to be a small cafe with mismatched furniture, local artwork on the walls, and a tiny stage in the corner. It was nothing like the upscale restaurants Delilah usually frequented, but as soon as she walked in, she felt a strange sense of relief, as if she could breathe more easily here. A few people looked up when she entered, clearly recognizing that she didn't belong, but no one said anything. Delilah took a seat at a small table near the back, ordered a coffee from a waitress with purple hair, and waited. Around 8 p.m., Ezra Cole walked in through a side door, guitar case in hand. He was dressed more casually than the night before, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but he carried himself with the same quiet dignity. He didn't notice Delilah at first. He greeted the barista by name, set up his guitar on the small stage, and adjusted the microphone. Only when he looked out at the audience did his eyes find her, widening slightly in surprise. Delilah's heart pounded. She'd come here on impulse, with no plan, no idea what she wanted to say to him. Now that he'd seen her, there was no turning back. Ezra began his set without acknowledging her beyond that first look of recognition. He played songs that were nothing like what she usually listened to, soulful, honest songs about life and love and loss. The small crowd seemed to know him well, calling out requests, nodding along to familiar lyrics. Delilah sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to draw attention to herself. She was so out of place here, in her expensive clothes and with her expensive car parked outside. But no one seemed to care. No one was judging her by her name or her family's money. They were all focused on the music, on Ezra. When his set ended, Ezra packed up his guitar and moved to the bar, where several people stopped to talk to him. Delilah waited, watching, gathering her courage. Finally, when the crowd around him thinned, she approached. "Mr. Cole." Her voice sounded small and uncertain. He turned, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Remington, this is a surprise. I wanted to apologize for what I said last night. It was cruel and thoughtless, and I'm deeply sorry." Ezra studied her for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. Delilah hadn't expected it to be that easy. She'd been prepared for anger, for rejection. "Thank you. And thank you for not taking the money. I understand why you wouldn't want anything from us after how you were treated." "That's not why I didn't take it," Ezra said. "I was hired to play music, and I did. But when I saw how my song affected you," he paused. "I couldn't take payment for something that personal." Delilah felt her cheeks flush. "Your song was beautiful. It made me think about things I've been avoiding." The barista called out to Ezra, asking if he wanted his usual post-performance coffee. He nodded, then turned back to Delilah. "Would you like to sit down?" he asked, gesturing to a small table in the corner. Delilah nodded, following him to the table. They sat in awkward silence until the barista brought 2 cups of coffee. "How did you find me?" Ezra asked. "One of the waiters mentioned this place. I hope you don't mind that I came. I'm just surprised. The East Side isn't usually a destination for someone like you." There was the divide between them, laid out plainly. "Someone like you." Delilah felt the weight of her family name, her privilege, her sheltered existence. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "Last night, when you were singing, it was like you were singing about me, about my life, and I realized I don't like the person I've become." Ezra's expression softened. "That song wasn't about you, Delilah. It was about me, about a relationship I walked away from because I was afraid of what other people would think, about the masks we all wear to fit in, to be accepted. It felt like it was about me," Delilah insisted. "I'm engaged, well, almost engaged to a man I don't love. I'm living a life that was planned out for me before I was born. I don't know who I am without all of it. Do you want to find out?" Ezra asked quietly. The question hung between them, simple yet profound. Did she want to find out who she was beyond the Remington name and fortune? Did she have the courage to find out? "I don't know how," she admitted. Ezra took a sip of his coffee. "Maybe that's the first step, admitting you don't have all the answers." They talked for nearly 2 hours. Ezra told her about growing up in a musical family, about studying at Juilliard on scholarship, about coming back to Charleston to care for his ailing grandmother. Delilah told him about the pressure of being a Remington, about her doubts about Charles, about her lack of direction. It was the most honest conversation she'd ever had with anyone. When they finally said goodbye, Delilah felt lighter somehow. She drove home with the windows down, the warm Charleston air on her face, Ezra's words echoing in her mind. "Do you want to find out?" Yes, she realized. She didn't want to find out who she was. She wanted to take off the mask she'd been wearing for so long. And Ezra Cole, with his soulful music and direct questions, might be the person to help her do it. Back at the Remington estate, Delilah parked her car and walked slowly toward the house, looking at it with new eyes. The grand mansion that had always been home now felt like a beautiful prison. Her phone buzzed with a text from Charles. "Hope you're feeling better. Don't forget, lunch with my parents on Sunday. I have something important to ask you." The engagement, the ring, the future that had been mapped out for her. Delilah took a deep breath and made a decision. She wouldn't give Charles an answer on Sunday. She wouldn't be pushed into an engagement she wasn't sure about. She would ask for time to figure out who she really was and what she really wanted. And maybe, just maybe, she would go back to the Blue Door next Friday night to hear Ezra Cole play again, to continue the conversation that had started with a cruel joke and a beautiful song. As she walked into the house, Delilah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Sunday arrived too quickly. Delilah sat in the passenger seat of Charles's BMW as they drove to his parents' estate for lunch. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about Ezra and their conversation at the Blue Door. For the first time in her life, someone had asked her what she wanted, not what was expected of her. "You're quiet today," Charles said, reaching over to pat her hand. "Still not feeling well?" "I'm fine," Delilah replied. "Just a little tired." Charles smiled confidently. "Well, I hope you're up for a celebration. I've already told my parents our news." Delilah's stomach tightened. "What news?" "Our engagement, of course." He glanced at her, his smile fading slightly at her expression. Don't look so surprised, Delilah. We've been heading this way for months. Your father and I discussed it last week. It's all arranged. Of course it was. The men in her life had arranged everything, just as they always did. Charles, I think we need to talk about this. I'm not sure I'm ready. Nonsense. He cut her off, just as her mother had done before the party. You're 24, from a good family. I'm 29, with a promising career at the bank. It's the perfect match. Everyone says so. Everyone except me, Delilah thought. The Preston estate was almost as grand as the Remingtons, with rolling lawns and a view of the Charleston harbor. Charles's parents, Robert and Virginia Preston, greeted them at the door with champagne already poured. There's the happy couple, Virginia exclaimed, air-kissing Delilah's cheeks. We were so disappointed when your announcement didn't happen at the party. But Charles explained about your migraine. Poor dear. Delilah forced a smile. Yes, it came on quite suddenly. Well, you're here now, Robert Preston said, leading them into the formal dining room where a table had been set with the family's best china. And we have much to celebrate. Throughout lunch, Delilah barely touched her food as the Prestons discussed wedding venues, potential dates, and how many people should be invited. No one asked her opinion. No one noticed her silence. They had already planned everything, just like they planned her entire life. After dessert, Charles cleared his throat and reached into his pocket. I think it's time to make this official, he announced, producing a velvet box. Delilah felt the room spinning. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not with his parents watching eagerly. Not when she had so many doubts. Charles opened the box to reveal a massive diamond ring. Ostentatious and cold, just like their relationship. Delilah Remington, he said, getting down on one knee in a gesture that felt rehearsed. Will you marry me and make me the happiest man in Charleston? 3 expectant faces stared at her, waiting, assuming. Delilah's voice caught in her throat. She thought of Ezra's song, of their conversation, of the feeling that there might be more to life than this. I need some time, Charles. The smiles around the table froze. Time, Charles repeated, still kneeling, the ring extended toward her. What do you mean, time? I'm not ready to answer right now. This is a big decision. Charles slowly stood up, closing the ring box with a snap. I don't understand. We've been together for a year. Our families have known each other forever. What is there to think about? Maybe what I want, Delilah suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. Virginia Preston set down her champagne glass with a sharp clink. I think we should give these two some privacy. Robert, as Charles's parents left the room, Delilah could feel their disapproval like a physical weight. What's going on, Delilah? Charles demanded once they were alone. Is this about your birthday party? Because I already told you I forgive you for disappearing. Delilah stood up, needing space between them. It's not about the party. It's about us. About this relationship that everyone seems to have decided on except me. Don't be dramatic, Charles scoffed. You've always known we were heading toward marriage. Our families expect it. And what about what I expect? What I want? Charles's expression hardened. And what do you want, Delilah? To throw away a perfectly good match? To disappoint your parents? To become the talk of Charleston society? Put that way, it sounded foolish. Ungrateful. Delilah felt her resolve weakening. Just give me a week, she said finally. 1 week to think about everything. Please, Charles. He considered her request, clearly unhappy but unwilling to make a scene. Fine, 1 week, but I expect an answer next Sunday. A yes. The drive home was silent and tense. When Charles dropped her off at the Remington estate, he didn't walk her to the door as he usually did. Inside, Delilah found her parents waiting in the living room. Well, her mother asked immediately. Let's see the ring. Delilah took a deep breath. I didn't say yes. The silence that followed was deafening. What do you mean, you didn't say yes? Her father finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I asked for time to think about it. Her mother stood up, face flushed with anger. Think about what? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Virginia Preston has already called me. Absolutely mortified. Margaret, her father said, putting a restraining hand on his wife's arm. He turned to Delilah. Sit down, daughter. Let's talk about this reasonably. Delilah sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Charles Preston is a fine young man from an excellent family, her father began. The merger of our families would be beneficial to all. His father and I have already discussed possible business ventures together. Of course they had. It was never just about love or happiness. It was about business, about money, about preserving the Remington legacy. I just want to be sure, Delilah said weakly. Sure of what? Her mother snapped. That you're throwing away the best match you'll ever make? That you're embarrassing this family? Margaret, please, her father said. Delilah, whatever doubts you're having are normal. Pre-wedding jitters. But you need to think about your future. About security. I am thinking about my future, Delilah insisted. And I'm not sure it's with Charles. Her father's expression darkened. Is there someone else? Ezra's face flashed in her mind. But that was ridiculous. She barely knew him. No, she answered honestly. There's no one else. I just need time to think. After another hour of arguments and tears, mostly from her mother, Delilah escaped to her room. She felt drained but also strangely empowered. For the first time in her life, she'd stood up to her parents. She'd asked for what she needed. All week, Delilah avoided Charles's calls and her mother's disapproving glances. She went through the motions of her usual routine: lunch with friends, a charity committee meeting, a hair appointment. But her mind was elsewhere. Every night, she found herself thinking about Ezra Cole, about his music, about the way he had looked at her, not as Delilah Remington, heiress, but just as Delilah. On Friday night, she found herself once again driving to the Blue Door. She parked her Mercedes around the corner, suddenly self-conscious about her wealth in this working-class neighborhood. The cafe was more crowded than it had been the previous week. Delilah slipped into a seat at the back, ordering her coffee and waiting. When Ezra walked in, guitar case in hand, his eyes immediately found hers, as if he'd been expecting her. He didn't acknowledge her during his set, but he played the song from her birthday party, Masks We Wear. And this time, when he sang about finding the courage to be true to yourself, Delilah felt a surge of strength. After his performance, as the crowd began to thin, Ezra made his way to her table. You came back, he said simply, sitting down across from her. I did, Delilah replied. Your music, it helps me think clearly. And what are you thinking about so clearly? Ezra asked, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My life, my future. Delilah took a deep breath. Charles proposed on Sunday. Ezra's smile faded. Congratulations. I didn't say yes. His eyes widened slightly. That must have gone over well. About as well as you'd expect, Delilah said with a small laugh. My mother is furious. Charles is confused. And my father thinks I'm having pre-wedding jitters. And what do you think? That simple question again. What did she think? What did she want? I think I'm scared, Delilah admitted. Scared of disappointing everyone. Scared of making the wrong choice. Scared of losing everything I've ever known. Ezra nodded, understanding in his eyes. And what are you hopeful for? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. I'm hopeful that there's more to life than country club memberships and charity galas, she said slowly. I'm hopeful that I can find out who I really am, without the Remington name attached to everything I do. That sounds like a good start, Ezra said. They talked for hours again, until the cafe was closing. Ezra told her about his music, his dreams of recording an album, his struggles as a black artist in a predominantly white industry. Delilah shared stories from her childhood, the pressure she'd always felt to be perfect, her secret love of painting that she'd abandoned because her mother said it wasn't ladylike to have paint under her fingernails. When they finally left the cafe, Ezra walked her to her car. Same time next week? He asked, his voice casual but his eyes serious. Delilah hesitated. Next week, she was supposed to give Charles her answer. Next week, she was supposed to accept the future that had been planned for her. I don't know if I can, she said honestly. Understand, Ezra replied. Then, reaching into his pocket, he handed her a small piece of paper. My number, in case you want to talk before then. Delilah took the paper, their fingers brushing briefly. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, she said simply. The real me, not just the Remington heiress. Ezra smiled. The real you is worth seeing, Delilah. As she drove home, Delilah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the mild Charleston night. For the first time in her life, someone was interested in the person she was beneath the polished exterior. Someone cared about what she thought, what she wanted, what she hoped for. The contrast between her conversations with Ezra and the ones with Charles and her parents couldn't have been starker. One made her feel alive and valued. The others made her feel like a possession, a pawn in their social chess game. By Sunday morning, Delilah had made her decision. She dressed carefully in a simple blue dress, not one of her usual designer outfits, and drove to the Preston estate for her lunch with Charles. He greeted her with a stiff kiss on the cheek. "I've been thinking about our conversation all week," he said as they sat in his parents' formal garden. "And I understand your hesitation. Marriage is a big step." Delilah nodded, surprised by his apparent understanding. "But," Charles continued, reaching for her hand, "I know we're right for each other. Our families are perfect together, and I'm prepared to be patient. We can have a long engagement if that's what you want." He was trying, in his way, but he still didn't understand. It wasn't about the timing. It was about the match itself. "Charles," Delilah said gently, pulling her hand away, "you're a good man, from a good family. You'll make someone very happy someday." His expression froze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't marry you. Not now. Not ever." Charles stood up abruptly. "This is about that musician, isn't it? The one from your party?" Delilah blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "I'm not stupid, Delilah. One of your friends saw you at some dive bar on the east side last week. With him." Shame washed over her. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she'd been caught stepping outside the boundaries of her world. "It's not about Ezra," she said, though even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Ezra had shown her a different way of living, a different way of seeing herself. "It's about me, about what I want." "And what do you want?" Charles demanded. "To throw away everything for some street musician?" The contempt in his voice sparked anger in Delilah. "He's a Juilliard graduate, actually, and this isn't about him. It's about the fact that in all the time we've been together, you've never once asked me what I want, what I dream about, what makes me happy." "I didn't think I had to," Charles said coldly. "I assumed being a Preston would make you happy. Clearly, I was wrong." "Clearly," Delilah agreed. Charles paced the garden path, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our families? To our reputations?" "I'm sorry," Delilah said, and she meant it. She hadn't wanted to hurt anyone. "But I can't marry you just to preserve a reputation." "Your father will be furious," Charles warned. "He and my father have been planning a merger." "Then they'll have to find another way to merge their businesses," Delilah replied. "They can't merge our lives." Charles stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You've changed." "Yes," Delilah admitted. "I think I have." She left the Preston estate feeling both terrified and free. She had just blown up her entire life, disappointed her family, and likely become the subject of Charleston's most vicious gossip. But she had also, for the first time, made a decision for herself. Back at home, the confrontation with her parents was everything she'd feared and worse. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" her father roared. "The Prestons are furious." Robert called off her golf game. "We had plans for a joint venture that would have doubled our holdings." "I'm sorry about your business deal," Delilah said, "but I couldn't marry Charles just to help the family investments." Her mother collapsed dramatically onto the sofa. "We'll be social outcasts. No one will invite us anywhere. Years of connections ruined." "That's a bit extreme, Mother," Delilah said. "I didn't marry someone Charles didn't approve of. I just didn't marry Charles." "Bad enough," her father said grimly. "And I hear there's someone else. Some musician from the wrong side of town." Delilah felt her face flush. "Ezra is a friend. That's all." "Ezra." Her mother sat up straight. "Ezra Cole? The black musician from your party?" The way she said it, with such disgust, made Delilah's stomach turn. "Yes, Mother. The very talented musician who played at my party. The one I was cruel to, if you remember." Her father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I forbid you to see him." Delilah almost laughed. "Forbid me? I'm 24 years old. You live under my roof. You spend my money. You bear my name." Her father's voice was dangerously quiet. "And as long as that's true, You will not associate with people who could damage this family's reputation. For a moment, Delilah considered backing down. It would be so much easier to apologize, to promise to stay away from Ezra, to try to make amends with Charles, to go back to being the Delilah she'd always been, obedient, agreeable, empty. But then she thought of Ezra's song, of his question, "What are you hopeful for?" "I'll move out," she said simply. Her parents stared at her in shock. "What did you say?" her father asked. "I said I'll move out. I'll get my own place. I'll find a job." Her mother actually laughed. "A job? Doing what? You majored in art history, for God's sake. You've never worked a day in your life." It was true. Delilah had no practical skills, no work experience. But she had to try. "I'll figure it out," she said with more confidence than she felt. "And how will you pay for this place of yours?" her father demanded. "Your trust fund doesn't mature until you're 30. Or until you marry," he added pointedly. "I have my savings," Delilah replied, though she knew her savings were really just the generous allowance her father had always provided. "Not anymore," her father said coldly. "I'm cutting you off, Delilah. No more allowance. No more credit cards. If you want to reject everything this family stands for, you'll do it without Remington money." Delilah felt the blood drain from her face. She'd expected anger, disappointment, even threats. But not this. Not a complete severance. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "Dead serious," her father replied. "You have a choice to make. Either you apologize to Charles, try to salvage that relationship, and behave like a Remington should, or you're on your own." "With no money, no job, and no place to live?" Delilah asked, her voice shaking. "Exactly," her father confirmed. "Now, what's it going to be?" Delilah looked from her father's stern face to her mother's tearful one. These were the people who had raised her, who had given her everything, except the freedom to be herself. "I need some air," she said, turning toward the door. "I need to think." "Don't take too long," her father called after her. "Charles won't wait forever, and neither will we." Delilah walked out to the garden, her mind racing. Could she really do this? Could she walk away from everything she'd ever known? From financial security? From her family? She took out her phone and the small piece of paper Ezra had given her. Before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed his number. "Ezra? It's Delilah. Can we talk?" An hour later, Delilah sat across from Ezra at a small diner far from Charleston's elite neighborhoods. She'd told him everything. Her rejection of Charles, her parents' ultimatum, her fear of what came next. "So that's it," she concluded, stirring her untouched coffee. "Either I go back to Charles and pretend to be someone I'm not for the rest of my life, or I lose everything." Ezra was quiet for a moment, considering her situation. "Not everything," he finally said. "Just the things money can buy." "Easy for you to say," Delilah replied, immediately regretting her tone. "I am sorry. That was unfair." "No, it was honest," Ezra said with a small smile. "And you're right. I've never had the kind of wealth you're walking away from. But I've had freedom. The freedom to choose my own path, make my own mistakes, find my own way." "And how's that working out for you?" Delilah asked, genuinely curious. "Some days better than others," Ezra admitted. "But even on the worst days, I know I'm living my truth. That counts for something." Delilah nodded, understanding what he meant. Even now, terrified as she was, she felt more alive, more authentic than she had in years. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed. "I don't know how to live without wealth, without the Remington name opening doors for me." "You learn," Ezra said simply. "One day at a time. And in the meantime, where do I live? How do I eat?" Ezra hesitated, then said, "I have a friend who runs a small gallery downtown. She's looking for help. The pay isn't great, but it's something. And my neighbor just moved out of her apartment. It's tiny, and in a neighborhood your parents would hate, but it's affordable." Delilah stared at him, hope and fear battling in her chest. "Why would you help me like this? You barely know me." Ezra's dark eyes held hers. "Because I see something in you worth helping. Because everyone deserves a chance to find out who they really are. And because..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'd like to know you better. The real Delilah." For the first time that day, Delilah smiled. "I'd like to know her too." As they left the diner, Delilah knew she was standing at a crossroads. Behind her lay security, wealth, and a life mapped out by others. Ahead lay uncertainty, struggle, and the terrifying freedom to choose her own path. "So, what's it going to be?" Ezra asked, echoing her father's question, but with a gentleness her father had never shown. Delilah took a deep breath. "I choose me," she said. "For the first time in my life, I choose me." "Is that all you're taking?" Rosa asked, watching as Delilah packed a single suitcase with clothes and a few personal items. "It's all I need," Delilah replied, though she wasn't sure if that was true. How much did a person really need to start over? After her conversation with Ezra, she'd returned home to find her parents waiting. Her father had asked for her decision, and she'd given it. She was leaving. The look of shock on her mother's face had almost made her change her mind. "Almost. Your father says you have until tomorrow morning," Rosa said, wringing her hands. "Maybe he'll calm down by then." Delilah shook her head. "He won't, and even if he did, nothing would really change. I'd still be expected to live the life they planned for me." Rosa had worked for the Remingtons since before Delilah was born. She was more of a mother to Delilah than Margaret Remington had ever been. "Where will you go?" Rosa asked, helping to fold a sweater. "I've found an apartment and a job." Delilah didn't mention that Ezra had helped with both. Her parents already blamed him enough. Rosa's eyes widened. "A job? Doing what?" "Working in an art gallery downtown." Delilah smiled at Rosa's surprise. "Remember how I used to love painting? Before Mother made me stop." "I remember," Rosa said softly. "You were good, too." Delilah hadn't painted in years, but working at the gallery would at least keep her connected to art. And the owner, Sophia Washington, Ezra's friend, had seemed genuinely pleased to hire her, even without experience. "What about money?" Rosa asked, always practical. "Your father is serious about cutting you off." "I know." Delilah had already tried to use her credit card to buy some groceries, only to find it had been canceled. "I have some cash saved. It's not much, but it's a start." Rosa disappeared from the room and returned moments later with a small envelope. "Here," she said, pressing it into Delilah's hand. "It's not much, but it might help." Delilah opened the envelope to find several $100s in cash. "Rosa, I can't take this. You work so hard for your money, and you've been kind to me for 24 years, Rosa replied firmly. "Let me be kind to you now." Tears filled Delilah's eyes as she hugged the housekeeper. Another reminder of what she was leaving behind. Not just wealth and privilege, but people who cared about her. "Promise you'll call if you need anything," Rosa whispered. "I promise." The next morning, Delilah loaded her suitcase into her Mercedes, the one possession her father hadn't taken away yet, though she suspected that was only because the car was registered in her name. Her parents didn't come downstairs to say goodbye. Only Rosa stood at the door, waving as Delilah drove away from the only home she'd ever known. Her new apartment was on the third floor of an old building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. No doorman, no elevator, no marble lobby, just a narrow staircase with chipped paint and the lingering smell of someone's cooking. Ezra met her at the building, helping to carry her suitcase up the stairs. "It's not what you're used to," he warned as he unlocked the door. That was an understatement. The apartment was tiny, one room with a kitchenette in the corner, a door leading to what she assumed was a bathroom, and a window overlooking a brick wall. The furniture consisted of a futon, a wobbly table with two mismatched chairs, and a dresser with a missing handle. But it was clean, and it was hers. "It's perfect," Delilah said, and was surprised to find she meant it. For the first time in her life, she had a space that wasn't filled with her parents' expectations, with generations of Remington history, with the weight of who she was supposed to be. "The gallery is about a 15-minute walk from here," Ezra said, setting down her suitcase. "Sophia is expecting you tomorrow at 9. Delilah nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. Yesterday, she'd been Delilah Remington, heiress. Today, she was just Delilah, unemployed, living in a one-room apartment with only a suitcase of belongings. "Second thoughts?" Ezra asked, watching her face. "No," Delilah said quickly. "Just adjusting." Ezra smiled. "It gets easier, I promise." After he left, promising to check on her the next day, Delilah sat on the futon, her new bed, and looked around her new home. It was so quiet compared to the Remington estate, with its staff always moving about, phones ringing, visitors coming and going. Here, she was alone with her thoughts and her fears. What if she couldn't do this? What if she failed? What if her parents were right and she wasn't equipped to live in the real world? She pushed those thoughts away and began to unpack her few belongings. Tomorrow would be her first day of work, her first real job. She needed to be ready. The Washington Gallery was a small space in a renovated warehouse, specializing in local artists and affordable art. It wasn't the high-end galleries Delilah was used to attending for charity events, but it had a warm, welcoming feel. Sophia Washington was a tall, elegant black woman in her 50s with short, natural hair and a no-nonsense manner. She showed Delilah around the gallery, explaining her duties, greeting customers, handling sales, managing the website, and occasionally helping to set up new exhibitions. "Ezra tells me you studied art history," Sophia said as they stood in front of a vibrant abstract painting. "Yes, at Vanderbilt," Delilah replied. "But I've never worked in a gallery before. You know art. The rest you can learn." Sophia gave her an appraising look. "Though I should warn you, this isn't the kind of gallery that sells paintings for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Our artists are working people. Our customers are regular folks who want something beautiful in their homes without taking out a second mortgage." Delilah nodded, understanding the implication. This wasn't the world of art she'd grown up in, where paintings were investments and status symbols. "I'm here to learn," she said simply. By the end of her first week, Delilah was exhausted but exhilarated. Working at the gallery was harder than she'd expected. Standing for hours, dealing with customers, learning the inventory management system that Sophia insisted on using despite its outdated interface. But it was also more rewarding than anything she'd done before. She loved talking to customers about the art, learning the stories behind each piece, seeing the joy on someone's face when they found a painting that spoke to them. And she was good at it. Her art history degree, which had seemed so useless to her mother, actually helped her connect with customers and explain the techniques and influences in various pieces. "You're a natural," Sophia told her at the end of her first week, handing her an envelope with her first paycheck. "Ezra was right about you." Delilah opened the envelope after Sophia walked away. The amount was small, so small that in her previous life, she wouldn't have considered it worth noticing. Now, it represented her independence, her ability to survive on her own. She walked home that evening with a new sense of pride. She'd earned this money. No one had given it to her because of her name or her family. At her apartment, she found a small package outside her door. Inside was a set of paintbrushes and a note in Ezra's handwriting, "For when you're ready to start creating again." "Dinner tonight?" Delilah smiled, tracing her fingers over the brushes. How had he known she'd been thinking about painting again? About creating something of her own? She texted him a thank you and a yes to dinner, then changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a simple blouse. Clothes she'd rarely worn in her previous life, where every outfit had been designer and every appearance carefully curated. Ezra took her to a small Ethiopian restaurant where they ate with their hands, scooping up spicy stews with pieces of spongy bread. It was unlike anything Delilah had ever eaten, and she loved it. "So, 1 week in the real world," Ezra said as they shared a coffee after dinner. "Verdict: harder than I expected," Delilah admitted. "But better too. I feel like I'm actually living, not just existing." "That's a good start," Ezra said with a smile. "Though I should warn you, it's not always this exciting. Real life has plenty of boring moments too." "I'll take boring over fake any day," Delilah replied. As they walked back to her apartment, Ezra's hand found hers. It felt natural, right, to lace her fingers through his. They hadn't discussed what was happening between them. This friendship that felt like it was becoming something more. But Delilah was in no rush to define it. For the first time in her life, she was letting things unfold naturally, without a predetermined outcome. At her door, Ezra kissed her cheek. "Good night, Delilah Remington." "Just Delilah," she corrected him. "I'm not sure I'm a Remington anymore." His eyes were serious as he looked at her. "You'll always be a Remington. That's part of who you are. The question is, who else are you going to be?" It was a question she was still answering day by day. The weeks passed in a new routine, work at the gallery, dinner with Ezra several times a week, occasional visits to the Blue Door to hear him play. She started painting again, small canvases that she worked on in the evenings, discovering a style that was all her own, bold, colorful, emotional. She made new friends, Sophia's daughter Maya, who was a photographer, Ezra's bandmate Marcus, who taught music at a local high school, the barista at the coffee shop near the gallery who always remembered her order. These people didn't care about her last name or her family connections. They liked her for who she was, not what she represented. But Charleston was a small city, especially in its social circles. It was inevitable that Delilah would eventually run into someone from her old life. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon at the gallery. Delilah was helping a customer when the door opened and Madison Bennett, her oldest friend from childhood, walked in. Delilah. Madison's perfectly made-up face registered shock. "It is you. I thought Olivia was making it up." Delilah excused herself from the customer and approached Madison. "Madia, what are you doing here? I heard a rumor that you were working in some gallery on the east side." Madison looked around, taking in the modest space with barely concealed disdain. "I had to see for myself." "Well, now you have," Delilah said, trying to keep her voice even. "This is where I work." Madison lowered her voice. "Delilah, what are you doing? Everyone's talking about how you've lost your mind. Throwing away Charles, living in some awful apartment, dating that musician." The way she said musician reminded Delilah of how her mother had said black, as if both were dirty words. "I haven't lost my mind," Delilah replied. "I've found myself." Madison rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. Look, your parents are worried sick. Your mother can barely show her face at the club anymore. And Charles, is Charles worried too?" Delilah asked, unable to keep the sarcasm from her voice. "Actually, yes," Madison said. "He still cares about you, Delilah. He's willing to forgive this phase if you come back now." "Phase," Delilah repeated. "This isn't a phase, Madison. This is my life now." Madison looked genuinely confused. "But why? Why would you choose this?" She gestured around the gallery. "Over everything you had." Delilah considered how to explain it to someone who had never questioned the life they were born into, who had never felt the suffocation of expectations, the emptiness of a predetermined path. "Because I'm happy," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy." Madison stared at her for a long moment. "Your father is very sick, you know." The words hit Delilah like a physical blow. "What? What's wrong with him?" "They found something on his last checkup. Some kind of heart problem. Your mother didn't want to tell you, but I think you should know." Delilah felt the room spin slightly. Her father sick? And her mother hadn't even called her? "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Madison shrugged. "Bad enough that he's making changes at the company. Setting things in order, they say." Guilt washed over Delilah. While she'd been building her new life, her father had been dealing with a health crisis. Should she have stayed? Should she have tried harder to find a compromise? "I should go see him," she murmured, more to herself than to Madison. "I think that would be wise," Madison agreed. "And while you're there, maybe you could reconsider this whole situation before it's too late to fix things." After Madison left, Delilah could barely focus on her work. Her father was sick, possibly seriously so. Despite everything that had happened, he was still her father. She still loved him. That evening, she told Ezra about Madison's visit and her father's condition. "Are you going to see him?" Ezra asked as they sat on her futon, sharing a pizza. "I think I have to," Delilah replied. "He's my father." Ezra nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Family is complicated." "Very complicated," Delilah agreed. "But if he's really sick, you should go," Ezra said. "Whatever happened between you, you'll regret it if you don't." The next day, Delilah called in sick to the gallery and drove her Mercedes, now showing signs of neglect without the Remingtons' regular maintenance, to her family's estate. Her hands trembled slightly as she rang the doorbell of the house she'd grown up in. Rosa answered, her face lighting up at the sight of Delilah. "Miss Delilah, you came back." She pulled Delilah into a tight hug. "Your father will be so happy." "How is he, Rosa?" Delilah asked. "I heard he's sick." Rosa's expression sobered. "The doctors say he needs surgery." Something about his heart valve. He's upstairs in his study, working even though the doctor told him to rest. Typical of her father, ignoring medical advice to keep the Remington empire running. Delilah made her way upstairs, her feet automatically following the familiar path to her father's study. She knocked softly on the door. "Come in," her father's voice called. William Remington looked up from his desk, his expression changing from irritation to shock when he saw who it was. Delilah. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face more lined, his normally robust complexion slightly gray. But his eyes were as sharp as ever as they took in her appearance. The simple dress she wore for work, the lack of expensive jewelry, the hair that was no longer professionally styled every week. "Hello, Father," Delilah said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I heard you were ill." "News travels fast," he remarked dryly. "Who told you?" "Rosa. Madison Bennett. I ran into her yesterday." Her father nodded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Well, you might as well sit down." Delilah sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, the proper posture that had been drilled into her since childhood. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like a man with a faulty heart valve," he replied. "The doctors want to operate next month." "Is it serious?" "Serious enough." He studied her face. "You look different." "I am different," Delilah said. "Still working at that gallery?" She nodded. "Still living in that awful apartment too, I imagine." "Yes." "And the musician?" "Still seeing him." Delilah met her father's gaze. "His name is Ezra, and yes, I'm still seeing him." William Remington sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You always were stubborn, just like me." There was a hint of pride in his voice that surprised Delilah. "Father, your mother isn't here," he interrupted. "She's at the club, probably telling everyone how worried she is about me while enjoying a martini lunch." The hint of bitterness in his tone caught Delilah off guard. Her parents had always presented a united front. "When is the surgery?" she asked. 3 weeks from Thursday," he replied. "Assuming my heart holds out that long." Delilah flinched at his bluntness. "Is there anything I can do?" Her father looked at her for a long moment. "You could come home." The words hung in the air between them. Come home. Back to the life she'd left behind. Back to the expectations and constraints. Back to being a Remington first and Delilah second. "I can't do that," she said softly. Her father nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "Can't or won't?" "Both," Delilah admitted. "I found something, Father. Something real. A life that's mine, not one that was planned for me. With him, this Ezra person." "Partly," Delilah said, "but also with my work, my art. I'm painting again." "Did you know that?" A flicker of something, surprise, interest, crossed her father's face. "You always had talent." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever given her about her art. Her mother had always discouraged it, calling it a hobby, not a proper pursuit for a Remington. "I'm happy, Father," Delilah said. "For the first time in my life, I'm really happy." William Remington looked down at the papers on his desk. Contracts, financial statements, the lifeblood of the Remington empire. "I'm making changes to my will," he said abruptly. In light of recent developments, Delilah felt a pang. She hadn't come here to talk about money or inheritance, but of course that's where her father's mind would go. "I understand," she said quietly. "Do you?" Her father looked up, his eyes suddenly intense. "Do you understand what it means to build something over generations? To have a legacy?" "I understand that it's important to you," Delilah replied. "But it's not what's important to me." Her father seemed to age before her eyes, the lines in his face deepening. "Then what is important to you, Delilah? This gallery job? This apartment on the wrong side of town? This musician who's filled your head with nonsense about finding yourself?" Delilah felt a flash of anger. "Ezra didn't fill my head with anything. He just showed me that there was another way to live. A way where I get to make my own choices, have my own voice. And that's worth throwing away everything I built for you." Her father's voice rose slightly. Then he winced, pressing a hand to his chest. "Father." Delilah stood, alarmed. "Are you all right?" He waved her away. "Fine. Just a twinge. The doctors say it'll happen." But he didn't look fine. His face had gone ashen, and a light sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. Should I call someone? Delilah asked, suddenly afraid. Rosa? Mother? No, her father said firmly. I'm fine. Just give me a minute. Delilah sat back down, watching him anxiously as he took several deep breaths. Gradually, his color improved. Maybe we shouldn't argue, she suggested gently. It's not good for your heart. To her surprise, her father chuckled, a raspy sound that turned into a cough. Now you sound like your mother. God forbid, Delilah replied with a small smile. For a moment, the tension between them eased. They were just a father and daughter, sharing a joke at the expense of a woman they both loved but often found difficult. I miss you, her father said suddenly. The house is too quiet without you. The admission, so unlike her stoic, business-minded father, brought tears to Delilah's eyes. I miss you too, she said. And Mother, and Rosa. But I can't come back, Father. Not to stay. William Remington nodded slowly. I see that now. You really have changed. I have, Delilah agreed. But I'm still your daughter. I still love you. I still want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. Her father looked down at his desk again, considering. The surgery, he said finally. Would you come? Be there that day. It was an olive branch, small, but significant coming from William Remington. Of course I will, Delilah promised. I'll be there the whole time. As she left the estate that day, Delilah felt both lighter and heavier. The reconciliation with her father, tentative as it was, had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. But the knowledge of his illness, the reality of his mortality, had added a new burden. That evening, as she and Ezra walked along the Charleston waterfront, she told him about the visit. So a truce? Ezra asked. Sort of, Delilah replied. He didn't exactly welcome me back with open arms. And he's still changing his will. Does that bother you? Ezra's question was gentle, without judgment. Delilah considered it. Not the money itself. I've discovered I can live on a lot less than I thought. But what it represents, being cut out of the family legacy, that hurts more than I expected. Ezra nodded, understanding. Family is complicated, he said again. What about your family? Delilah asked. You've never really talked about them. A shadow crossed Ezra's face. Not much to tell. My parents died when I was young. My grandmother raised me. She's in a nursing home now. That's why I came back to Charleston after Juilliard. I'd like to meet her sometime, Delilah said. Ezra smiled. I'd like that too. Though I should warn you, she's not one to hold back her opinions. Sound like someone else I know, Delilah teased, bumping her shoulder against his. As they walked, hand in hand, Delilah thought about how much her life had changed in the past few months. She'd lost so much. Her family's approval, financial security, her place in Charleston society. But she'd gained things too. Independence, real friends, a sense of purpose, and whatever this was with Ezra, this growing feeling that made her heart race whenever he was near. What are you thinking about? Ezra asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. That song you sang at my party, Delilah replied. About wearing masks. About finding the courage to be yourself. What about it? Did you ever finish it? The song seemed like it was missing something. An ending. Ezra smiled. I'm still working on it. I think it needs the right inspiration for the ending. And have you found it? The right inspiration? He looked at her, his eyes warm in the fading light. I'm getting closer every day. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of work, hospital visits, and preparations for her father's surgery. Delilah continued her job at the gallery, but spent evenings at the hospital with her father. Sometimes her mother was there, cold and distant at first, but gradually thawing as she saw Delilah's genuine concern for her father. Charles visited the hospital once while Delilah was there. He was polite but formal, clearly still hurt by her rejection. Delilah couldn't blame him. In his mind, they'd had the perfect relationship, the perfect future planned. He couldn't understand why she'd walked away from it all. The night before the surgery, Delilah stayed late at the hospital. Her mother had gone home to rest, leaving her alone with her father. Nervous, she asked as she sat beside his bed. Terrified, her father admitted with surprising honesty. But don't tell your mother I said that. Delilah smiled. Your secret is safe with me. William Remington reached out and took her hand, another surprise. Her father had never been demonstrative with his affection. I've been thinking, he said, About what you said. About finding something real. Delilah waited, letting him find the words. I'm not sure I ever did that, he continued. Find something real. I followed the path my father laid out for me, just as his father did for him. The Remington way. You build an incredible business, Delilah said. You should be proud of that. I am, her father replied. But sometimes I wonder what else I might have done, if I'd had the courage you have. Delilah squeezed his hand. It's not too late, you know. After your surgery, after you recover, you could do something different, something just for you. Her father smiled, a genuine smile that made him look years younger. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll take up painting, give you some competition. They both laughed, the sound strange and wonderful in the sterile hospital room. I'm proud of you, her father said suddenly, his voice gruff with emotion. For standing up for yourself, for knowing what you want. I may not always show it, but I am. Tears filled Delilah's eyes. Thank you, Father. That means more than you know. As she left the hospital that night, Delilah felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected. Whatever happened tomorrow, she and her father had reached an understanding. Not perfect, but real. And real was all she was asking for these days. She found Ezra waiting for her outside, leaning against his car. How is he? Ezra asked, pulling her into a hug. Scared, Delilah replied, but try not to show it. How very Remington of him. Ezra smiled. Where to? Your place. Delilah nodded, suddenly exhausted. The emotional toll of the past weeks had caught up with her. Back at her apartment, Ezra made her tea while she kicked off her shoes and curled up on the futon. In the 2 months since she'd moved in, she'd transformed the space with colorful pillows, a rug Sophia had given her, and her own paintings on the walls. It was small, but it was home. I have something for you, Ezra said, sitting beside her and taking out his guitar. A song, a new one, an old one with a new ending. He began to play the familiar melody of Masks We Wear, the song that had changed everything at her birthday party. But as he reached the part where he'd stopped that night, he continued, his voice growing stronger as he sang about finding courage, about taking off the mask, about discovering love in unexpected places, about two people from different worlds finding each other once all the pretenses were stripped away. When he finished, Delilah was crying again. Seems like all she did these days was cry, though these were different tears than the ones she'd shed in her old life. These were real, honest tears of emotion, not the carefully controlled ones she'd been taught to produce at appropriate moments. That was beautiful, she whispered. It's our story, Ezra said simply. Or at least, the beginning of it. The beginning? Delilah asked, her heart racing. I hope so, Ezra replied, setting down his guitar and taking her hands in his. Delilah, these past months, watching you transform, watching you find yourself, it's been amazing. You're amazing, and I've fallen in love with you. Every version of you, from the society girl who made a cruel joke to the woman who's brave enough to start over. All of you. Delilah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Love. That's what this feeling was, this combination of safety and excitement, comfort and passion. I love you too, she said, the words coming easily, naturally. And I'm not sure I would have found myself without you. Ezra shook his head. You would have. Maybe not that night, maybe not with that song. But someday. You were always too real for that world, Delilah. They stayed up late, talking, planning, dreaming. About his music, her art, their future. Nothing certain, nothing predetermined, just possibilities. The next morning, Delilah arrived at the hospital early for her father's surgery. To her surprise, her mother was already there, looking tired but composed. Delilah, Margaret Remington said, nodding stiffly. Your father will be glad you're here. It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but it wasn't the cold rejection of their previous encounters either. How is he this morning? Delilah asked. Pretending he's not scared, her mother replied with a small smile that reminded Delilah, with a jolt, of her own. You know your father? Yes, she did. Better now, perhaps, than ever before. The doctor came to explain the procedure, a valve replacement that should fix the problem if all went well. The risks were significant but manageable. William Remington would be in surgery for several hours. As they prepared to take him to the operating room, Delilah's father reached for her hand. "Remember what I said?" he told her. "I'm proud of you. I'll be here when you wake up," Delilah promised. As the orderlies wheeled him away, Delilah and her mother settled in for the long wait. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a while, neither knowing quite what to say after months of estrangement. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Your father told me about your conversation, about how you're happy." Delilah nodded. "I am. And this person you're seeing, this musician, he treats you well." It was as close to acceptance as her mother could manage right now. "Yes," Delilah said simply. "Ezra is a good man." Margaret nodded, her lips pressed together. "Your father wants to meet him. After the surgery. When he's recovered." Delilah stared at her mother in shock. "He does. He says if this man is important to you, then he should meet him properly. Not as the hired entertainment at a party." It was more than Delilah had dared to hope for. "And what do you think, Mother?" Margaret Remington looked away, her profile sharp and elegant even in the harsh hospital lighting. I don't want to lose my daughter completely." It wasn't an embrace of Delilah's new life. It wasn't even a clear acceptance of Ezra. But it was a start. "You haven't lost me," Delilah said softly. "I'm still here. Just different." Her mother glanced at her, then quickly away. "Yes, you're different. More like who?" "Like yourself," Margaret finished. "Like the little girl you were before we taught you to be a proper Remington." The admission startled Delilah. She hadn't realized her mother had noticed the change in her over the years, the gradual suppression of her true self to fit the Remington mold. Before she could respond, a nurse appeared. "Mrs. Remington, your husband is in surgery now. Everything is going as expected so far." Margaret nodded, her composure back in place. "Thank you." The hours crawled by. Delilah and her mother made awkward small talk, read magazines, paced the waiting room. Occasionally, a nurse would update them. Everything proceeding normally, no complications so far. Around noon, Ezra texted, "Thinking of you and your father. Let me know if you need anything." Delilah smiled at the message, typing back a quick thank you. "Is that him?" her mother asked, noticing the smile. "Yes," Delilah admitted. "He's asking about father." Margaret raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. Another hour passed, then another. Finally, the surgeon appeared, still in his scrubs, looking tired but satisfied. "The surgery went well," he announced. "We were able to repair the valve without any complications. Mr. Remington is in recovery now. He'll need to stay in hospital for about a week, and the full recovery will take several months, but I expect him to make a complete recovery." Relief washed over Delilah. Her father was going to be okay. "Can we see him?" Margaret asked, already gathering her purse. "In about an hour," the doctor replied. "He's still coming out of the anesthesia." When they were finally allowed into the recovery room, William Remington looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in the hospital bed with tubes and monitors attached to him. But his eyes were clear as they found Delilah's. "You're still here," he said, his voice raspy. "I promised I would be," Delilah replied, taking his hand. Her father squeezed her fingers weakly. "Good. I have something to tell you. Both of you." He looked from Delilah to Margaret. "Life's too short for stubbornness. Even Remington's stubbornness." Delilah felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "What are you saying, Father?" "I'm saying," William Remington said slowly, "that I want my daughter in my life. On her terms, not mine." Margaret made a small noise of protest, but he silenced her with a look. And he continued, "I want to meet this young man of yours. Properly this time." Delilah couldn't hold back her tears. "I'd like that," she whispered. Her father closed his eyes, tired from the brief conversation. "Good. That's settled then." As they left the hospital that evening, Delilah's mother surprised her by asking, "Would you like a ride home?" "To your apartment." It was the first acknowledgement that Delilah's apartment was her home now, not the Remington estate. "Thank you," Delilah said. "But Ezra is picking me up." Her mother's lips tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Another time, perhaps." "I'd like that," Delilah replied. As her mother walked to her car, Delilah saw Ezra pull up in his modest sedan. Two worlds colliding but not crashing. It wouldn't be easy. There would be tensions, misunderstandings, old prejudices to overcome. But it was possible. There could be a future where both worlds existed in her life. Ezra got out of the car, his face questioning. "How's your father?" "He's going to be okay," Delilah said, walking into his embrace. "And he wants to meet you." Ezra pulled back in surprise. "Me? Why?" Delilah smiled, touching his face gently. "Because you're important to me, and I think he's finally beginning to understand that." As they drove away from the hospital, Delilah felt a sense of possibility she'd never experienced before. Her life wasn't mapped out anymore. There was no predetermined path, no set expectations. There was just her and Ezra and a future they would create together. A future where she could be both a Remington and herself, where she could love her family and also set boundaries, where she could paint and work and love freely. A future with no masks, only truth. 3 weeks after his surgery, William Remington was finally allowed to return home. The doctors were pleased with his recovery, though they cautioned that he needed to take things slowly. No work for at least another month. No stress. No arguments. "Like that's possible in this family," Delilah muttered to Ezra as they drove to the Remington estate for dinner. It was the first time Ezra would be meeting her parents properly, not as hired entertainment, but as Delilah's boyfriend. "Nervous?" she asked, glancing at him. He looked handsome in a navy blazer and slacks. Not quite as formal as what Charles would have worn, but respectful. "Terrified," Ezra admitted with a small smile. "But if you could stand up to your parents and change your entire life, I can handle one dinner." Delilah reached for his hand. "Just be yourself. That's who I fell in love with." As they pulled up to the mansion, Delilah saw her mother watching from the window. Margaret Remington had called 3 times that week to confirm the dinner, each time finding some reason to mention Charles, his promotion at the bank, his new house on the water, his continued single status. "Ready?" Delilah asked as they reached the front door. "As I'll ever be," Ezra replied. Rosa answered the door, her warm smile a welcome contrast to the tension Delilah felt. "Miss Delilah, and you must be Mr. Cole. Come in, come in." They're waiting in the sitting room. The formal sitting room, not the family room where they usually gathered. Another sign of how different this evening would be. William Remington rose carefully from his chair as they entered. He looked better than he had in the hospital, though still paler and thinner than his usual robust self. "Delilah," he said, kissing her cheek. Then, turning to Ezra, he extended his hand. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me, sir," Ezra replied, his voice steady as he shook William's hand. "And please call me Ezra." Margaret Remington remained seated, nodding stiffly. "Mr. Cole." The first hour was awkward. Conversation over drinks in the sitting room felt stilted, with long pauses and careful politeness on all sides. William asked about Ezra's music, his education at Juilliard, his grandmother. Margaret said little, watching Ezra with narrow eyes whenever he spoke. Dinner was marginally better. Rosa had prepared William's favorite meal, roast beef with all the trimmings, and the familiar food seemed to relax him. "Delilah tells me you're quite talented," William said to Ezra as they ate. "That night at her party, I must admit, your music was impressive." "Thank you, sir," Ezra replied, "though I'm sorry about how that evening ended." William waved a hand dismissively. "Water under the bridge. It seems to have worked out for the best, in a roundabout way." Margaret set down her fork with a sharp clink. "Has it? Our daughter living in that tiny apartment, working for minimum wage at that gallery, throwing away everything we built for her. How is that for the best?" "Mother," Delilah began, but Ezra placed a calming hand on her arm. "Mrs. Remington," he said, his voice respectful but firm. "I understand your concerns. From your perspective, Delilah has given up a lot, but she's also gained things that can't be measured in square footage or bank balances. Such as," Margaret challenged, "independence, self-respect, the freedom to discover who she really is." Ezra held Margaret's gaze. "And she hasn't thrown away anything. The Remington name, the values you raised her with, those are still part of her. She's just adding to them, not rejecting them." William nodded slowly, considering Ezra's words. "Well put, young man." Margaret looked less convinced, but she didn't argue further. After dinner, William invited Ezra into his study for a brandy while Delilah helped Rosa clear the table. An excuse, she knew, for her father to speak to Ezra alone. "Don't worry," her father said, noticing her anxious glance. "I'm not going to threaten him or offer him money to leave town. This isn't one of your mother's soap operas." Delilah smiled despite her nerves. "Just remember what the doctor said. No stress." In the kitchen, Rosa was humming as she loaded the dishwasher. "That young man has good manners," she observed. "And he looks at you like you hung the moon." "He does?" Delilah asked, feeling a warm glow at the thought. And you look at him the same way." Rosa smiled knowingly. "Never saw you look at Mr. Charles like that." Delilah laughed. "That's because I never felt about Charles the way I feel about Ezra." "What does your father think of him?" Rosa asked, lowering her voice and glancing toward the doorway. "I'm not sure yet," Delilah admitted. "But the fact that he invited him here, that he's talking to him now, it's more than I hoped for." "Your father is a proud man," Rosa said, wiping her hands on a towel. "But he loves you, more than his pride, more than his name, more than his money. He just needed a reminder of what really matters." Delilah hugged the older woman. "Thank you, Rosa, for always seeing the best in all of us." When she returned to the sitting room, her mother was alone, sipping a glass of wine and staring out the window at the manicured gardens. "Where's father?" Delilah asked. "Still in his study with Ezra." Margaret turned to face her daughter. "He's not what I expected." "Ezra?" "Yes. He's articulate, well-educated." Margaret seemed reluctant to acknowledge these qualities, as if they contradicted some preconceived notion she'd held. "He's also kind," Delilah added, "and talented, and he makes me happy." Margaret sighed. "That's what your father said you'd say." She took another sip of wine. "I just don't understand, Delilah. You had everything. A beautiful life. Charles." "I didn't love Charles," Delilah interrupted gently. "And the beautiful life you're talking about wasn't mine. It was the one you and father planned for me. We wanted what was best for you," Margaret insisted. "I know," Delilah said, sitting beside her mother on the sofa. "But what if what's best for me isn't what you thought it would be? What if I need to find my own way?" Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked at her for what felt like the first time in years. "You really are happy, aren't you? In that tiny apartment, with Ezra." "I am," Delilah confirmed. "Happier than I've ever been." Her mother nodded slowly, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I suppose that's what matters in the end." It wasn't a blessing exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, a step toward acceptance. In the study, William Remington poured 2 glasses of brandy, handing one to Ezra. "My doctor would have a fit if he saw me drinking this," he remarked with a wry smile. "But some occasions call for breaking the rules." Ezra accepted the glass, watching the older man carefully. William Remington was a formidable figure, even in his weakened state. A man used to power, to control, to getting his way. "I imagine you know why I wanted to speak to you alone," William said, settling into his leather chair. "I have some idea," Ezra replied. "My daughter thinks she's in love with you. And I know I'm in love with her," Ezra said simply. William raised an eyebrow. Bold statement. "It's the truth." William swirled the brandy in his glass, studying its amber depths. "Love is complicated, Mr. Cole, Ezra, especially when it crosses certain boundaries." "You mean racial boundaries," Ezra said directly, "or class boundaries, or both?" William nodded, appreciating Ezra's candor. "Both. Charleston is changing, but not that quickly. You and Delilah, you'll face challenges." "We already have," Ezra pointed out. "She lost her family, her security, her social position, all because of her choice to live authentically, which happened to include me." "And you?" William asked. "What have you lost?" Ezra considered the question. "Nothing material, but I've gained perspective. I've seen how wealth and privilege can be both a blessing and a burden, how it can shape a person or misshape them if they let it." William leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. "Let me be direct, Ezra. What are your intentions toward my daughter?" "To love her," Ezra replied without hesitation. "To support her as she discovers who she really is. To build a life with her, if that's what she wants. And if that life includes returning to the Remington fold, Taking her place in the family business someday? Would you support that too? The question caught Ezra off guard. Is that what you're offering? William shrugged. I'm considering my options. My brush with mortality has made me reflective about what matters, about legacy. Ezra set down his barely touched brandy. If that's what Delilah wants, to be part of the Remington business, to take up her family legacy, then yes, I would support her. But it has to be your choice. Not yours. Not mine. Hers. William studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. One more question. Your music, is it a hobby or a career? A career, Ezra said firmly. I'm working on an album. I have a few small labels interested. It won't make me rich, but it's what I was born to do. And if you became part of the Remington family, would you expect financial support for this career? Ezra stiffened. No, sir. I make my own way. Always have. William smiled. A genuine smile that transformed his stern face. Good answer. Now, shall we rejoin the ladies before they think I've thrown you out? As they left the study, Ezra wasn't sure what to make of the conversation. Had it been a test? An interrogation? A genuine attempt to understand him? Perhaps all three. The rest of the evening passed more comfortably. William asked about Delilah's work at the gallery, seeming genuinely interested in her descriptions of the artists they represented. Even Margaret thawed slightly, asking Ezra about his grandmother and offering to send flowers to her nursing home. When it was time to leave, William pulled Delilah aside while Margaret was showing Ezra her prized orchid collection in the conservatory. He's a good man, William said quietly. Not what I would have chosen for you, but a good man. Coming from William Remington, it was high praise indeed. Thank you, Father, Delilah said, hugging him carefully, mindful of his healing chest. For giving him a chance. For giving us a chance. I nearly lost you, her father replied, his voice gruff with emotion. I don't intend to make that mistake again. In the car on the way back to Delilah's apartment, Ezra was quiet, thoughtful. Well, Delilah prompted, what did my father say to you in the study? He asked about my intentions, Ezra replied, and whether I would support you if you decided to return to the Remington business someday. Delilah frowned. Return to the business? What does that mean? I'm not sure, Ezra admitted, but I think he's considering his options. Planning for the future. A future that includes me, even after everything that's happened. Especially after everything that's happened, Ezra said. Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying what's important. Delilah considered this as they drove through the nighttime streets of Charleston. Her father, offering her a way back into the family business? It wasn't what she'd expected, and she wasn't sure how she felt about it. The next few months settled into a new normal. Delilah continued working at the gallery, where Sophia had promoted her to assistant manager. Her own paintings, vibrant abstracts that seemed to capture emotion in color and form, had caught the attention of some of the gallery's regular customers, and Sophia had suggested including a few in their next exhibition. Ezra's career was also gaining momentum. He'd signed with a small indie label to produce his first album and had begun playing at larger venues around Charleston and Savannah. His song, Masks We Wear, the one that had changed everything at Delilah's party, had been featured on a popular streaming playlist, bringing new fans to his music. Delilah's relationship with her parents continued to evolve. Sunday dinners at the Remington estate became a regular occurrence, sometimes with Ezra, sometimes just Delilah. William had returned to work part-time, his health steadily improving. Margaret still occasionally mentioned Charles or made subtle digs about Delilah's modest lifestyle, but the open hostility had faded. One Sunday, in late autumn, after dinner, William asked Delilah to join him in his study. How are things at the gallery? He asked as they settled into the comfortable leather chairs. Good, Delilah replied. Busy. We're preparing for a big exhibition next month. Including your work? I hear, her father said with a hint of pride. Delilah nodded, still surprised by his interest in her art. Just a few pieces, but yes. And Ezra? His music is going well. Very well. His album comes out next month. William nodded, tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair, a sign Delilah knew that he was working up to something important. I've been thinking, he said finally, about the future. About the Remington legacy. Delilah tensed slightly. She'd been waiting for this conversation since her dinner with Ezra months ago. The business is strong, William continued, but it needs new vision, fresh ideas. The tobacco industry is changing, and we need to change with it. I'm sure you'll find the right people to lead that change, Delilah said cautiously. Her father shook his head. It's not just about hiring the right executives. It's about the heart and soul of the company, the Remington spirit. Delilah waited, sensing there was more. I want you to come back, William said directly. Not to the life you left behind. I understand now that wasn't right for you. But to the company, in a new role, one we would create together. Delilah stared at him in surprise. What kind of role? Head of the Remington Foundation, her father replied. Our charitable arm. It's been neglected for years, treated as an afterthought, a tax write-off. But it could be more. It could support the arts, education, community development. It could make a real difference. Delilah felt a flutter of interest. The Remington Foundation had always been her mother's pet project, funding debutante balls and symphony galas. But with real resources behind it, with a genuine mission, you'd have complete control, her father continued. Your own budget, your own staff, and a seat on the board of directors. Why now? Delilah asked. Why me? William leaned forward, his expression serious. Because I've seen what you're capable of. The courage it took to walk away from everything. The determination to build a new life on your own terms. Those are Remington qualities, though I didn't recognize them at the time. He paused, his voice softening. And because you were right, about needing to find your own path, about what really matters in life. My heart scare taught me that much. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. This was more than she'd ever expected. Not just acceptance, but respect. Recognition of who she truly was. I need time to think about it, she said. To talk to Ezra, to consider what it would mean. Her father nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Here's some information about the Foundation's current projects, financials, structure. Read through it. Imagine what it could be. As Delilah drove home that evening, her mind was spinning. Head of the Remington Foundation. A chance to use the family resources for good. A way to be a Remington on her own terms. But what would it mean for her life now? For her work at the gallery? For her relationship with Ezra? Ezra was playing at the Blue Door that night. Delilah slipped in the back just as his set was starting, watching him from the shadows. He looked so at home on that small stage, his guitar across his knee, his voice filling the room with emotion and truth. This was his world, intimate venues, soulful music, authenticity. How would he fit into the world of board meetings and charitable galas? After his set, she joined him at the bar, where he was chatting with some fans. His face lit up when he saw her. Hey, you, he said, kissing her cheek. I thought you were having dinner with your parents tonight. I did, Delilah replied, but I wanted to see you play. As the crowd around them thinned, she told them about her father's offer. Head of the Remington Foundation, Ezra repeated thoughtfully. That's quite an opportunity. It is, Delilah agreed. But I'm not sure if it's right for me. If it's right for us. Why wouldn't it be right for us? Ezra asked, genuinely curious. Because it would pull me back into that world. Board meetings, fundraisers, society events. The world you left behind, Ezra said, understanding in his eyes. Yes, Delilah confirmed. And you and I, we've built something different. Something real. Ezra took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. Delilah, what we have is real no matter where we are. In your tiny apartment or at a fancy gala. The question is, what do you want? That question again. The one that had started this whole journey. I don't know, Delilah admitted. Part of me is excited about the possibility, about using the Remington resources to do something meaningful. But another part is afraid of getting pulled back into a life that isn't authentic. Then take your time, Ezra advised. Think about it. Pray about it if that helps. And know that whatever you decide, I'm with you. Over the next week, Delilah read through the folder her father had given her. The Remington Foundation had resources, significant resources, but had been unfocused in its giving. A little to the symphony, a little to the hospital, a little to whatever charity was fashionable that year. She began to imagine what it could be. A force for good in Charleston, supporting arts education in underserved communities, funding scholarships, backing small community organizations doing important work. The possibilities were exciting. She talked to Sophia at the gallery, who encouraged her to consider the opportunity. "You've learned a lot here," Sophia said. "About art, about business, about what matters. Maybe it's time to take those lessons back to where you started." She talked to Ezra's grandmother, Eliza Cole, a formidable woman even at 82, confined to a wheelchair, but sharp as ever. "Child," Eliza said when Delilah explained her dilemma, "money is just a tool. It's not good or bad in itself. It's what you do with it that matters." And she talked to Ezra night after night, exploring her fears, her hopes, her doubts. "What if I go back and nothing's really changed?" she asked one evening as they walked along the Charleston Battery. "What if it's all just a way to get me back under their control?" "Then you leave again," Ezra said simply. "You've done it once. You could do it again if you had to. And what about us?" Delilah pressed. "If I take this position, I'll be back in that world. The world that looks at us and sees only what's different, not what's the same." Ezra stopped walking, turning to face her in the golden light of sunset. "Delilah, I love you. That doesn't change whether we're at the Blue Door or at a Remington gala. The question is, can you be yourself, your real self, in both places?" It was the heart of the matter. Could she take what she'd learned about herself, about authenticity, about what truly mattered, back into the world she'd left behind? Could she be a Remington and still be Delilah? A month later, Delilah stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Charleston Hotel, addressing the assembled crowd at the annual Remington Foundation Gala. Her parents sat at the head table, her father still thin, but looking healthier than he had in years. Her mother, elegant as always, actually seemed proud as she watched Delilah speak. Ezra sat beside them, handsome in a tuxedo, looking only slightly out of place among Charleston's elite. He'd insisted on renting the tux rather than letting William buy him one, a small but significant statement of his independence. "The Remington Foundation is entering a new era," Delilah was saying, her voice confident as it carried across the ballroom. "An era of meaningful impact, of community partnership, of real change." She outlined the foundation's new focus areas: arts education, community development, scholarships for promising students from underserved areas. She introduced the board of directors, a diverse group that included Sophia Washington, Marcus from Ezra's band, and several community leaders who would never have been invited to a Remington event in the past. "This isn't just about writing checks," Delilah continued. "It's about using the Remington resources, our money, yes, but also our connections, our influence, our place in this community, to make Charleston better for everyone, not just those who live south abroad." There was a murmur in the crowd at this reference to Charleston's elite neighborhood. But William Remington was nodding in agreement, and that seemed to reassure the old guard that this wasn't a complete revolution. After the speeches, as the band played and couples took to the dance floor, Delilah found a moment alone with Ezra on the hotel's terrace. "You were amazing," he said, pulling her close. "A natural leader." "I was terrified," Delilah admitted. "All those people watching, judging. If they were judging, it was with admiration," Ezra assured her. "Even your mother looked proud." "Miracles do happen," Delilah laughed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the Charleston harbor, the lights of the city reflected in the dark water. "No regrets?" Ezra asked softly. "About taking the position?" Delilah considered the question. The past month had been a whirlwind, setting up her office at Remington headquarters, assembling her team, drafting the foundation's new mission statement. She'd kept her apartment on the east side, though she spent less time there now. She still painted when she could find the time, and Sophia had included 2 of her pieces in the gallery's latest exhibition. And she and Ezra were still together, navigating their different worlds, finding common ground, building something real. "No regrets," she said firmly. "It feels right, like I'm bringing together all the parts of myself, the Remington heiress and the gallery assistant, the society girl and the artist, finding a way to be all of me." Ezra smiled, pulling her closer. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, to be fully yourself." Inside the ballroom, The band started playing a familiar melody, Masks We Wear, Ezra's song, the one that had started it all. But this wasn't Ezra performing it. This was a full orchestra with a female vocalist interpreting the song in a new way. Did you know about this? Delilah asked, surprised. Ezra nodded. Your father asked if the band could learn it. Said it was a special request. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. Another unexpected gesture from William Remington. Another sign that he truly was trying to understand, to accept, to change. Dance with me? Ezra asked, extending his hand. As they swayed to the music, their song, transformed but still recognizable, Delilah rested her head on Ezra's shoulder. She could see her parents through the terrace doors, watching them. Her mother's expression was still complicated, a mixture of acceptance and lingering doubt. But her father was smiling, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I love you, Delilah whispered to Ezra. Thank you for helping me find myself. You did the hard part, Ezra replied. I just played the soundtrack. Delilah laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace. Some soundtrack. It changed everything. Not everything, Ezra said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. Some things were always there, waiting to be discovered. As the song ended, William Remington stepped onto the terrace, moving carefully but with purpose. May I interrupt? He asked. Ezra nodded, stepping back respectfully. I just wanted to say, William began, his voice gruff with emotion, how proud I am of what you've done with the foundation, of the woman you've become. Delilah felt tears threaten again. Thank you, Father. That means more than you know. William cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment. Yes, well, there's something else. A business matter. Of course. Even in his new, more reflective state, William Remington was still a businessman at heart. I've been thinking about succession planning, he continued. About the future of Remington Enterprises. Delilah tensed slightly. Was this leading where she thought it was? The foundation is just the beginning, her father said. I want you to consider taking a larger role in the company. Eventually, perhaps, taking over as CEO. And there it was. The offer she'd once expected as her birthright, then rejected as a gilded cage, now presented as a choice, an opportunity. That's a big step, Delilah said carefully. I'm just getting started with the foundation. No rush, her father assured her. Take your time. Think about it. Talk it over with Ezra. He glanced at Ezra, including him in the conversation in a way that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Whatever you decide, William continued, the company will be yours eventually. You're a Remington. It's your legacy. Delilah looked from her father to Ezra, feeling the weight of the decision before her. Taking over Remington Enterprises would mean fully embracing her family legacy, stepping into the role she'd been groomed for since birth. But could she do it on her own terms? Could she transform the company as she was transforming the foundation? I'll think about it, she promised. But not tonight. Tonight is for celebrating what we've already accomplished. Her father nodded, satisfied for now. Fair enough, but don't wait too long. I'm not getting any younger, despite what the doctors say. After he returned to the ballroom, Ezra took Delilah's hand again. CEO of Remington Enterprises, he said with a low whistle. That's quite a promotion. It's too soon, Delilah replied. I'm not ready. Maybe not today, Ezra agreed. But someday, I think you'd be amazing at it. Delilah looked at him in surprise. You do. I do, Ezra confirmed. You have vision, compassion, integrity. And you understand both worlds now, privilege and struggle, power and vulnerability. That makes you uniquely qualified to lead. Delilah leaned against the terrace railing, considering his words. It will mean going all the way back in, becoming everything I walked away from. No, Ezra said firmly. It would mean bringing everything you've learned back with you, changing the system from within. Inside the ballroom, the band had started playing again, a lively dance number that had filled the floor with couples. Through the glass doors, Delilah could see her mother dancing with an old family friend, her father chatting with Sophia Washington, worlds colliding but not crashing. Her phone buzzed in her small evening bag. A text from Maya, Sophia's daughter, with a photo attached. One of Delilah's paintings had just sold at the gallery exhibition. her first sale as an artist. Joy bubbled up inside her. In that moment, all the pieces of her life seemed to align. Her family, her art, her work at the foundation, her love for Ezra. Different worlds, different selves, all coming together into one authentic whole. "Whatever you decide," Ezra said, noticing her smile, "I'm with you. CEO or artist or both." "Both," Delilah said, suddenly certain. "Definitely both." Later that night, after the gala had ended and they'd returned to Delilah's apartment, still her home, despite her father's frequent hints about moving back to the family estate, she sat on the futon, now adorned with colorful pillows and a handmade quilt from Ezra's grandmother. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked as Ezra made tea in the tiny kitchenette. "To be both a Remington and myself? To run the company and still keep what we've built here?" Ezra brought her a steaming mug, sitting beside her on the futon. "I think you're already doing it. Every day, finding the balance, creating a new way of being Delilah Remington." He was right, she realized. This past year had been about discovering who she was apart from the Remington name. But perhaps the next chapter was about bringing that authentic self back to her family legacy, transforming it from within. "What about us?" she asked, voicing the fear that still lingered. "If I become CEO, if I step fully back into that world, what happens to us?" Ezra set down his tea, taking her hands in his. "Delilah, what we have isn't based on where we live or what we do for work. It's based on who we are together, on truth, on seeing each other, really seeing each other. That doesn't change whether you're running a gallery or running Remington Enterprises." To emphasize his point, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring. Not a flashy diamond like the one Charles had offered, but a unique design featuring a small emerald surrounded by tiny pearls. "It was my grandmother's. She wanted you to have it." Delilah stared at the ring, tears filling her eyes. "I'm not asking because your father offered you the company," Ezra continued. "I'm not asking because of anything that happened tonight. I'm asking because I love you, all of you. The society girl and the artist. The heiress and the gallery assistant. Every version of Delilah." He took the ring from the box, holding it up in the soft lamplight. "Will you marry me? Not because it's expected or planned or proper, but because it's real. Because we're real." Delilah looked at the ring, at Ezra's face, at the small apartment that had become her sanctuary. She thought about the foundation, about her father's offer, about all the possible futures stretching before her. A year ago, she would have analyzed every angle, considered every implication, worried about what everyone would think. But now the answer was simple. "Yes," she said, holding out her hand. "Because it's real. Because we're real." As Ezra slipped the ring onto her finger, her phone buzzed again. A voicemail from her father. "Call me tomorrow. There's more we need to discuss about the company. About your future." Delilah smiled, setting the phone aside without listening to the rest of the message. Tomorrow would bring decisions, challenges, opportunities. The Remington legacy and all entailed. The complications of merging her two worlds. But tonight was about this moment, this choice, this love that had begun with a cruel joke and a soulful song, and it transformed into something neither of them could have imagined. Ezra pulled her close, his eyes reflecting the same certainty she felt. "No masks," he whispered. Just us, Delilah agreed, knowing it was both a promise and a beginning. Outside her window, Charleston slept, the elite neighborhood south of Broad, the working-class east side, the historic downtown, the modern suburbs. Different worlds existing side by side, just as the different parts of herself now existed in harmony, no longer at war. She was Delilah Remington, heiress, future CEO, artist, fiancée to a musician from the wrong side of town. All of it true, all of it real. And as Ezra kissed her, as the ring sparkled on her finger, as the future stretched out before them, complex, challenging, but full of possibility, Delilah knew that the song that had once made her run away in tears had given her the greatest gift of all, the courage to be herself, to take off the mask, and to love finally without fear.